Hi guys, Annie Lab here. The story begins with a distant memory, showing a boy reading a book about the great mages who defeated the demon lords. This inspires him to strive to become one of the legendary mages and a man of pure heart and justice. We are then taken to the future, in present day, with a view of the city called Fibel, located in the southern region of the Alzano Empire. This community was developed along with the Alzano Imperial Magic Academy, known as the most prominent school of its kind, which teaches the most advanced magical arts. We are then introduced to a girl named Rumia Tingel, a student of the academy. She saw a guy who was hurt on the side of the street, so she is using magic on the old man to heal him. She told the old man to keep this a secret as it's forbidden to use magic outside of the Imperial Academy. After this, a girl shouts out to Rumia, who is her best friend named Sistine Fibel. The two of them are on their way to the academy, and on their way there, Sistine is upset that her favorite teacher, Huey Listen, has recently resigned from the academy, and the two of them discuss what a great teacher he was. In the meantime, they will have a new substitute teacher, who they hope to be extremely passionate about teaching magic just like their previous instructor. Suddenly, a boy came running down the street and shouting for everyone to move out of the way. The two get scared, and Rumia is forced to use her magic powers, sending the boy flying into the air. Eventually, the boy falls back down into a fountain of water. They both approach him to see if he is okay, until he gets up and starts to pose while tossing his hair back and introduces himself as Glenn Radars. They both seem impressed, and after he starts to examine Rumia's body, as she looks very familiar to him. Sistine thinks he's rude, so she attacks him once again, using a magic spell and leaves him laying in the fountain of water as they both head over to class. Meanwhile in the classroom, every student is talking about how frustrated they are, since their new teacher is late and still hasn't arrived yet. After some time, suddenly a man walks inside the classroom, and to Rumia's and Sistine's surprise, it's Glenn. He introduces himself to the rest of the class, and said he will be their substitute magic instructor for the time being. Sistine shouts out that they don't care about his introduction and to start the class already, so he starts teaching the students. He takes out the chalk and starts writing on the board, but he had actually written that the class would be doing self-studying today, because he's too tired to teach them, and after he decides to take a nap on the desk. Sistine is furious at Glenn, and begins throwing her books at him. After, the headmaster and professor are talking about Glenn Radars, and the other professor is extremely angry that they would allow such a person of unknown origins teach their students at the Imperial Academy. It turns out that Glenn has no teaching license, and is only a third-ranking mage, which means he's below the minimum requirements to teach in the Magic Academy. Nonetheless, the Academy head of states, Professor Celica Arfania, one of the most powerful mages in the entire city, recommends him to the headmaster, so the Academy committee accepts him to teach here. The next day, Glenn continues to teach his students casually, and again asks them to keep studying on their own, which further infuriates Sistine as she's desperate to learn so she can pass her magic exam. Later on, Glenn has a flashback and it's revealed that Celica hires him temporarily until they find a new good instructor. He initially declines, explaining how he's not even qualified to be a teacher, but Celica uses her magic to threaten him and force him to accept the job. While he remembers what happened, Sistine challenges him to a magic duel for not teaching properly. He accepts the duel and agrees that whoever wins will get the loser to do whatever the winner wants. He sets the rules of the duel, and he chooses the shock bolt. Each time he loses, he changes the rules. In the end, Sistine successfully defeats him, but he immediately runs away and says he never agrees to anything. The next day, Glenn still tells his students to study on their own despite the fact that he had lost the duel yesterday. Suddenly, one of his students comes toward him to ask for assistance. However, Sistine steps in and offers to help her instead. Sistine also says that Glenn doesn't know anything about magic, which leads to a debate between the two of them. Glenn asks Sistine about the importance of magic in society, and she answers that magic gives them a better understanding of the universe. However, Glenn proclaims that magic is only useful for killing people. Sistine slaps him and leaves the room immediately while crying. Later that day, Glenn spots Rumia in the lab, trying to perform a magic circle spell. He tells her that she lacks mercury and helps her out by telling her a little trick about magic circles. Rumia becomes thrilled to see that her magic circle works. Then, they both walk together out of the lab. While having a conversation, she asks him about his past, but he avoids the question with another question. Rumia also reveals that a powerful mage once saved her from the evil mages who kidnapped her, and she wants to reciprocate that debt by guiding humanity not to misuse magic. On the other hand, Sistine wants to learn magic because this is her way to honor her grandfather. The next day, Glenn apologizes to the classroom, especially to Sistine. He then decides to take his job more seriously and is motivated to help his students become excellent mages. Despite this, he insults the whole class and implies to them that they are fools because they don't understand magic. Glenn then teaches them the shock bolt and demonstrates how it can take a different form if it is chanted differently, which is not described in the textbooks. He also tells them that magic is not a principle but an expression. He further shows them other uses of the lightning magic and quickly becomes a very popular teacher in the entire academy. The next day, Celica tells him she is going away with all the teachers to attend a magic conference. This leaves Glenn in charge of the whole academy all by himself. Sistine believes Glenn is a great teacher but also a scumbag. However, Rumia tells her to give him a chance. Unexpectedly, the Divine Wisdom group plans to attack the academy while the teachers are not around, confidently believing Glenn would not be a problem. Glenn spots a man on his way to class, and this man attacks him. Two men enter the classroom and tell them Glenn will not come. Sistine challenges them, and they silence her with a warning shot. They kidnap Rumia, who is actually Princess Ermiana Elkel Alzano, the princess of the Alzano Empire who is supposed to be dead. Rumia then claims that Glenn will save them, but they tell her he is dead. When they left, they also took Sistine with them. Afterward, one of the men tries to violate Sistine to break her spirit, and she begs him not to do it. Glenn finds Sistine, but he is attacked once again by the mage. Surprisingly, Glenn manages to nullify the magic. His original spell, Fool's World, made this possible, which cancels all the spells around him. In return, he can't also activate his own magic. Glenn took the opportunity to defeat the enemy with his fist using the Imperial military fighting style. Sistine thanks him and reveals that this mysterious organization has taken Rumia as their hostage. Celica calls Glenn, and he tells her that the academy is under attack. That's also when they both conclude that one of the teachers has betrayed them. The traitor is someone from the inside who reveals to them how to disable the academy's barrier. Glenn then asks for backup, but she cannot teleport to the academy as the teleporter has already been taken down. She tells him she is on her way and tells him not to die. Sistine breaks down in tears, but Glenn comforts her. He promises her to bring Rumia back and defeat the assaulter with all his might. Unexpectedly, the enemy summons a portal. Then, a ghost army appears and attacks Glenn. Glenn tries to punch the enemies, but it doesn't work, so he instructs Sistine to use her magic, and together they cast a powerful spell of extinction rays and manage to beat the army. However, the magic makes Glenn bleed and causes him to drop to the floor. The enemy's leader abruptly attacks them, so Glenn pushes Sistine away. The leader easily overpowers Glenn. Since Glenn is too exhausted, he knows to himself that he can't defeat the enemy alone. So, he teams up with Sistine once again to win over the enemy. Glenn distracts him while Sistine uses her magical abilities to assist him, and finally, Glenn is able to deliver a finishing blow. Glenn is hurt badly at the end of the battle, but Sistine heals him with the last of her power. Afterward, Glenn goes to save Rumia alone since Sistine has fainted due to magic exhaustion. Turns out Huey Listen, their former teacher, is the traitor, and he reveals his plan to blow up the academy and take Rumia. Glenn uses his own blood to break the barrier, even if it would cost him his own life. He then passes out as he gets to the last barrier. However, Rumia gives all that she can to heal him. Fortunately, Rumia's effort works and Glenn manages to break the spell and defeats Huey. After the incident, the academy is back to normal. Queen Alicia VII decides to visit Rumia and witness her in the magic competition at the academy. She also asks Zealous Dragheart to escort her. Zealous, the Grand Commander of the Imperial Guard, worries that people will find out about Rumia's identity. The academy holds a tournament, and Glenn's class refuses to participate because they always lose. Sistine and Rumia motivate their classmates to join the competition, but they don't seem to be enthusiastic about it. Glenn walks in and registers the name of his students for the tournament. He assigns all his students to different events of the competition based on their abilities and vows to make them win. Glenn is only doing this because he wants to win the huge prize money associated with the instructor of the winning class. Students are playing when an argument breaks out between two classes. Hallie Astrai, the teacher of the other class, asks Glenn to switch places, but he refuses, and they challenge each other. Glenn bets their 3-month wages on his class's victory. Sistine also agrees to it, and the students start training so hard. The day of the magic competition has finally come, and when Queen Alicia arrives, the competition begins. Glenn's class puts all their best efforts into winning. Due to Glenn's wise leadership, they easily win the initial rounds. Rumia is also competing in the tournament. Her opponents are formidable. However, Glenn says she has stronger mental strength than other students. Since Rumia's opponent has lost consciousness, she manages to win against all odds, and Queen Alicia is very proud of her. Two mysterious people named Albert Fraser and Riel Rayford appear. They both seem very familiar with Glenn and are assigned to monitor Zealous alongside the guardsmen who have been acting suspiciously. They suspect that they might go against the Queen. While everyone eats lunch, Lynn Tidehus decides to back out from the Transfiguration Magic competition because she does not want to disappoint her classmates. She approaches Glenn and tells her that she's not feeling confident about her competition. He transforms himself into Rumia and boosts her morale. He also tells Lynn to study a special technique, and she starts preparing for her competition. Later on, Rumia brings Glenn some lunch, and they eat together. Queen Alicia walks in and moves closer to them. The Queen apologizes for Glenn's expulsion from the Imperial Mage Corps. He tells her that it's okay and there's no need to apologize. The Queen is happy to see Rumia, but she denies being her daughter. When the Queen gets back, she's put under arrest by Zealous. Albert and Riel have seen what happened, and Albert stops Riel from advancing. Meanwhile, Sistine comes to Glenn to inform him that Rumia is missing. Glenn then finds Rumia in the park and comforts her. Rumia reveals that she hasn't forgiven her for what she did. It turns out Rumia has severe past issues with her mom. Rumia realizes that Glenn knows about her, and she tells him why her mother abandoned her. She is the devil incarnate, one of the gifted. She wants to be intimate with her mother, but doesn't want to betray her new family. Glenn recounts to Rumia about his time in the Imperial Army and tells her that it's best to confess her feelings toward her mother. The Imperial guards arrest Rumia and accuse her of trying to assassinate the Queen. Glenn is knocked out but immediately snaps out of it. Glenn saves Rumia, and he assures her that the Queen will never ask to execute her. He contacts Celica, and it's revealed that she, too, has been taken hostage along with the Queen. A conditional curse is placed on the Queen, and Celica is told to follow the instructions of the Divine Wisdom, or the Queen dies. Now, it's up to Glenn to save them as he's done talking to them. Albert and Riel arrive on the scene. Riel jumps forward with an attack, but is shut down by Albert with a bolt of lightning. Glenn reveals that they were once partners from the Imperial Corps. Being caught in a dangerous situation, they decide to work together. Glenn asks Albert to take care of his class through the tournament and then takes Rumia away. Now, Albert temporarily replaces Glenn as the class instructor, leading the team of students to further victories. First up is Lynn, who successfully manages to use her transfiguration spell and wins all the points. There is a duel in the tournament's finale, and Sistine has to lead her class to victory. On the other hand, Zealous instructs a guard to find and end Glenn and Rumia. As the final competition starts, the opponents don't even stand a chance as Sistine easily beats them using a modified version of her spell called the Wall of Tempest. Class 2 is announced as the winner. Meanwhile, Glenn and Rumia get surrounded by the guards, only to discover that they are Albert and Riel using their self-illusion spell. During the prize distribution ceremony, Albert and Riel revealed themselves as Glenn and Rumia. They did this to trick the enemies and for them to get easier access to the Queen. Glenn manages to free Celica and Queen from the magic, and instantly, Celica puts up a magical barrier to protect the students from the conflict inside this magical barrier. When Glenn and Rumia meet the Queen, she orders the guards to kill Rumia. Glenn then realizes the Queen is under a curse, and he breaks the curse. Glenn manages to defeat Zealous with his Fool's World magic. The investigation finally reveals that the mastermind behind this incident is Eleanor Charlotte, the Queen's female servant who works for Divine Wisdom. Albert and Riel try to capture Eleanor, but she manages to escape. Everything is finally over. Albert and Riel return to their base, and the Queen returned to her palace. Glenn reveals to Rumia that he was also the one who saved her when she was younger, and the class celebrates their victory after winning the magic competition. Glenn starts to teach Sistine hand-to-hand combat, and she wonders why. He tells her she needs to grow stronger if she wants to protect Rumia. After the incident, Glenn waits for Rumia every day because he fears for her safety. Rumia and Sistine are talking to Glenn when suddenly Riel attacks them from behind. She reveals that she is assigned to protect Rumia and has disguised herself as a student at Academy. Riel exhibits unusual magic that other students have never seen since she was part of the Queen's special forces. She was extremely powerful and could use such a high tier of magic. After this incident, other students keep their distance away from her. At lunch, Sistine and Rumia approach her. They try talking to her and gradually get acquainted with her. They finally manage to befriend her and get along quite well with the other students. The following day, Glenn announces that he's taking a class trip to the alchemy research lab. Since the lab was situated on the beach, all the male students are so fired up. Suddenly, Albert reveals himself and says that he's also assigned to protect Rumia. They have finally arrived in the city, and they all have fun on the beach. The boys decide to peek into the women's rooms at night. However, Glenn manages to stop them. Later on, Riel talks to Glenn about his past. She is mad at Glenn because he left her alone in the Imperial Mage Corps unit. She says to Glenn that all she wants is to fight alongside him. Meanwhile, Eleanor is seen standing on the shore alongside a mysterious guy. Just as expected, the Divine Wisdom prepares another wicked plan. Sistine tries talking to Riel during the extensive walk, but she keeps on ignoring her. At the lab, they're greeted by Birks Blauman, who is the head of the White Alchemy Research Lab. He gives the students a tour around the lab, and they all get fascinated by the research being conducted there. Rumia and Sistine seem interested in the resurrection alchemy, but they wonder if it is ethical to experiment with life. Birks clears their doubt and tries to explain the project, but is interrupted by Glenn. He tells them the project is sealed away because it had too many casualties. Later on, Riel acts very weird, and the girls are worried about her, but she rejects anyone's help. When Glenn tries to talk to Riel, she runs away and cries to the shore, and there she meets her brother, Shaun Rayford. Albert is watching all this from a distance, however, he has to face Eleanor. Then, it is revealed that she possesses some sort of regeneration magic. Meanwhile, Glenn tells the girls not to abandon Riel and goes after her. Shaun urges her to betray Glenn and kidnaps Rumia, but Glenn arrives just in time. Riel has unexpectedly stabbed Glenn with her sword, causing Glenn to collapse to the shore. When Albert learns about Glenn, he gets distracted, and Eleanor escapes. It turns out this is their plan, after all. Riel goes to Rumia's room and kidnaps her. Sistine tries to stop her, but she runs away. Albert brings Glenn to Sistine since she is an expert at healing people through magic and proceeds to heal him. Glenn finally recovers and wakes up. He finds Albert sitting near him. Albert invites Glenn to save Riel alongside Rumia. He also says that if the mission asks for Riel to be eliminated, he won't hesitate to do so. Meanwhile, Birks has joined forces with Eleanor and Shaun. It's revealed that they plan to use Rumia as an amplifier for their research. Albert also informs Glenn that he has enchanted Rumia with a spell that allows him to track her. When they reach the lab, they're greeted by several monsters, but successfully defeat them all, clearing their way toward the lab. Since Eleanor knows about Glenn's arrival, she considers it an appropriate time to escape. In no time, they finally reach the lab's entrance. Birks then transforms into a monster and attacks Albert and Glenn. Unlike the other monsters, he's pretty powerful. Albert agrees to fight him and orders Glenn to find and save Rumia. Glenn has finally found Rumia, and he comes forward to fight Shaun. Glenn releases Rumia, but Riel stands in his way and attacks him. Nonetheless, Glenn intelligently defeats her using mind games, then he goes after Shaun. It is then revealed that Riel is an artificial human being created through experimentation. Riel remembers all of this, and suddenly, multiple clones of Riel attack Glenn. As he fights the clones, he also convinces Riel that she isn't a horrible person. Riel then one-handedly defeats all her clones. Finally, Glenn defeats Shaun, while Albert also defeats Birks. Then, all of them return and go back home. Later on, Glenn meets someone named Leos Klydos, who turns out to be Sistine's fiancé. He was invited to the academy as a teacher, and he is aware of Glenn's popularity. The teachers in the academy are celebrating Leos' arrival, but Celica is quite suspicious of his sudden appearance. Leos teaches his first class, and every student is impressed by his teaching style. Glenn is also attending this class and is worried that the high level of magic being taught to them might corrupt them. Leos approaches Sistine and asks her to go on a walk with him, and while walking, he proposes to Sistine. However, she refuses because she wants to pursue her dream, but Leos insults her saying it's impossible to fulfill that dream. Glenn, who is hiding behind a bush, emerges and takes Sistine's side. Leos asks him to leave them alone since it's their personal matter. However, Sistine just says that she actually loves Glenn instead of Leos. This leads to an extensive argument between Leos and Glenn, leading to a duel. Glenn then calls his class and tells them about the duel, saying he'll train them for it. At night, Glenn meets Albert, who tells him that a drug called angel dust has been smuggled into the city. Glenn, who has dealt with it prior, asks Albert to include him in the investigation, but Albert refuses. Afterward, Laos is revealed to be talking to a mysterious man about the duel. The man seemingly predicted this outcome and asked Leos to put on his best show. The next morning, all the students are gathered in the field for the match between Leos and Glenn. Hallie announces the rules of the match, and the duel begins. Leo's class begins to dominate after teaching them an important tactic in mage combat. Frustrated, Glenn resorts to dirty tactics just to win the duel, but they run out of time, and the duel ends as a tie. Leos, unhappy with the outcome, challenges Glenn into a one-on-one duel, but Sistine slaps him, stating she is not a prize to be won. Sistine is angry at Glenn, but Rumia believes there is a reason behind his actions and suggests that Sistine should talk to him. Meanwhile, a few people are found dead outside the academy due to angel dust. Leos wants to marry Sistine just to become the head of the family. Glenn tells Sistine his story about Sarah Silvers. Additionally, Glenn assures her that he is doing all of these to prevent her from giving up on her dreams. Leos shows up, and despite the threats from Glenn, he tells Sistine about Glenn's past. He talks about how Glenn was a killer, and they fight, but Leos destroys Glenn easily. Leos blackmails Sistine into marrying him. Glenn then leaves the academy and does not show up for the duel since Sistine agrees to marry Leos in a week. Riel wants to kill Leos, but Rumia stops her, believing Glenn will do something. As Sistine is about to get married, Glenn appears and stops the wedding, leaving with Sistine. Glenn figures out that she is being blackmailed and has a plan to defeat Leos. Glenn and Sistine end up being attacked by people infected with angel dust. The students also end up being surrounded by the infected people, but the Imperial Court Mage Corps arrive and save them. Sistine is also attacked, but Glenn manages to save her. Sistine gets shocked and terrified as Glenn literally kills the infected people. He remembers what happened to Sarah and becomes enraged by this. Killing them all makes Sistine scared of Glenn. Leos arrives, and Glenn finally realizes that he is not Leos, but Jadis, a former member of the Imperial Mage Corps, who later reveals his true identity. Glenn tells Sistine to run as he prepares to take Jadis on. Jadis then reveals that he is after the Akashic Records, which will grant him the power to rule the world. However, he does not want it till Glenn is dead. When Jadis is about to kill Glenn, Sistine saves him. Together, they defeat Jadis, who still manages to escape, but Sistine reaches her limit after using an extensive amount of magic power. So, Glenn takes Sistine home instead of pursuing Jadis. Glenn tells Albert about Jadis' intention, and Celica leaves to explore the underground labyrinth. This anime ends with Glenn happily meeting his students to start his morning class. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this and want to see more, please make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel with notifications on so you never miss a future video. And until next time guys, take care!